Okay, so have you ever wondered throughout the entire history of the National Football League who the worst NFL players to ever suit up are regardless of draft position? Well, I wanted to know, and I thought might as well do a player from each decade, just to see how the NFL player has gotten better and better, or worse, over the years. So we're gonna go with at least one terrible player per decade, and we're gonna start with the 1960s when basic NFL stats started to get tracked. Now, for me personally, I remember 1960 like it was yesterday, and I sure as hell remember who Bob Timberlake was. Now, Bob Timberlake is going to be a very unique player for this type of list, because he was actually a stud in college, who was the quarterback of the Michigan Wolverines and led them to a Big Ten Conference Championship in 1964, as well as a Rose Bowl victory in 1965 over Oregon State. Basically, what you gotta know is he was all over the field, he was catching touchdowns, he was receiving them, he was throwing them, and more importantly, he was also the team's kicker and punter. He was then selected by the New York Giants in the 1965 NFL Draft and wasn't supposed to get any substantial playing time. But the Giants then decided that the man had one hell of a leg, so they had to put him in when they were attempting long field goals, and for example, he made a 43-yard field goal in a win over the Steelers. So the guy was not supposed to be the team's permanent kicker, until later in the season the Giants kicker actually got injured, forcing Bob Timberlake into the starting position. And for the entire year, Bob Timberlake went 0 for 14 on field goals. He missed every single field goal attempt. I mean, hell, the man missed a 19-yarder. And on top of all of that, none of his talents from the college level translated over to the professional level whatsoever, and he was out of the league 1 year later, never to return. I mean, it was so bad that the man just became a priest. Bob Timberlake is pretty much exactly what would happen if you threw like a Discord moderator onto a professional football field. But let's move on to the 1960s, and it only gets worse from here. Boris Schlappak was an undrafted kicker for the Colts in 1972. And unlike the previous cornerstone of kicking, Bob Timberlake, this man Boris had absolutely no college background whatsoever. But somehow he was able to work his way into an NFL roster and got the kicking job for the Colts for the entire season. Or for as long as he had the job, because unlike Bob making one field goal, Boris missed all of them. Boris Schlappak broke the NFL record for most kicks attempted without a single make, going 0 for 8 in his entire American football career. I say American football because the man just quit football and went to go play soccer, because obviously kicking balls was his calling. But the craziest thing about Boris is that he came into the NFL, did the least amount that he could possibly do, then just left. But 2 years later, in 1974, Boris returned with glory as he came back in the 1974 Hall of Fame game and, get this, made 2 field goals. Now, Boris was fantastic, but I want to give a shout out to one more player in the 1970s, Randy Hedberg. Randy started 4 games for the famous Creamsicle Bucks team that at one point had gone 0-26. Randy's complicated arc starts after getting benched of 2 weeks of football, and then he came back and made his Herculean return in week 6. But he came back and mustered up a performance of Randy, no! And after a few more putrid performances, that was the last time Randy Hedberg would see a game as a quarterback in the National Football League, as he would finish his career with the Hall of Fame numbers of 25 for 90 passing, 244 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Good for a career quarterback rating of 0. 0 quarterback rating. So, will there be another quarterback on this list to contend the throne of Randy Hedberg? Well, the 1980s and one particular Chicago and Cardinals quarterback wants to reach for the crown. Rusty Lish. You know, there's actually a chance that you know who this man is, as he went to Notre Dame in 1976 and was the starting quarterback there for a whole year. The problem was, in 1977, the coaches realized, he lacks the ability to, quarterback, and he was replaced by, But even after barely playing in 1977, Rusty found himself drafted in the 4th round of the 1980 NFL Draft, and on the Cardinals, he found himself in a chance to prove his worth in a Week 16 game. After everything was settled, Rusty could go out there and sling the ball around as much as he wanted, proving that he belonged in... Yep, that's classic Rusty. So it was already established that Rusty Lish could not play the quarterback position to save his life. So going into the next year, the Cardinals had to do something with Rusty just gathering dust on the bench all year long. So, late in the year, the Cardinals had suffered 2 injuries to their best safeties, and the coach must have looked at Rusty decomposing on the bench and decided it would be beneficial to the team to put Rusty in at safety. The problem, Rusty Lish had 0 experience with the safety position whatsoever. So in what I can only fathom to be a sick joke by the coach of the Cardinals, he chose to use Rusty as a human meat shield and watched him get charred at safety for 3 straight games. And of course it only got worse for Rusty from here, as after throwing for just 13 more passes for the Cardinals, and 2 picks, he found himself in Chicago. And in the 1984 season, after 1 injury to Jim McMahon, Rusty Lish had his shot at reclamation. And when he was given that chance, he mustered a game so detestable that midway through the game, the Bears pulled Rusty Lish at quarterback for Hall of Fame running back Walter Payton. The Bears decided it would be better if they had a running back to play quarterback rather than their quarterback to play quarterback. If that's not the most disrespectful thing that can happen in any sport, then please, I'm all ears. Now for the 1990s, man, I didn't want to pick him, but he gave me no other choice. I have to go with Akili Smith. If you haven't already seen the video right here on the worst draft busts in NFL history, then I suggest you watch it because I really went in depth on Akili Smith in that one. But don't worry, I'll give you a good summary here. Basically, Akili Smith was actually a really touted prospect coming out of Oregon. And of course, the red flags came pouring in almost immediately, as he took the Wonderlic test, which is supposed to measure a quarterback's ability to read a playbook, and scored a horrible 16 out of 50. But the Bengals didn't care and took him 3rd overall to be their next franchise quarterback, even signing him to a 7-year, $56 million contract. And in his first year, at the very least, it was clear that he should not have been on the field, as he pretty much only had 1 above average game all year long and didn't throw a single touchdown throughout the entire season. To put his play into perspective, he's pretty much like current Russell Wilson with the throwing capacity of Nathan Peterman. But as I was saying, when he was drafted 3rd overall, the Bengals actually declined an offer from the Saints. And what did the Saints offer for Akili Smith? Well, they offered every single pick in their 1999 draft, a 2000 first, a 2001 first, a 2nd in 2002, and their soul. Instead, the Bengals chose Akili Smith. He stuck around with the Bengals for a few more years, didn't do anything, and never played professional football ever again. Now, he was no Rusty Lish or, Bob Timberlake, but as you'll see as we approach the more modern NFL, players who are bad simply weren't let into the league, so it's gonna get harder and harder to find the bottom of the bucket when it comes to talent in the NFL. But that doesn't mean those players don't exist. As we move into the 2000s, and let me introduce you to Spurgeon Wynn. The only reason you may have even remotely heard of who this dude is because he was one of the 6 quarterbacks that was selected in front of Tom Brady, thus having his spirit sacrificed to the GOAT. So like Tom Brady, Spurgeon Wynn was drafted in the 6th round of the 2000 draft, and it did take him some time to get onto the field, but once he did, his his impact was felt. It took until week 14 until he got his shot, and when he got his shot, he was lobbed onto the field rawer than a school lunch chicken sandwich, and set the gold standard to qualify for this list, as Spurgeon Wynn went 5 for 16 for 17 yards and a final QBR of 40.6. They lost 48-0. To the Jacksonville Jag. I don't even need any more statistics to show you how horrendous this guy was at football, but what should be said is that basically with Doug Peterson and Tim Couch already on the Browns roster, the Browns just needed to add Spurgeon Wynn to the roster to complete their infinity gauntlet of the worst quarterback room in NFL history. So yeah, he blew his chance in the NFL, but if you need an energy broker in Houston, Texas, well, I know a guy. Now the final decade of this video, the 2010s, where human peak evolution coincided with the biggest talent pool the NFL has ever seen, all of that culminating in a very hard decision for me. And in fact, a decision that I decided was just too hard to make, so I went with the entire Cleveland Browns draftees from the 2010s. Specifically, Corey Coleman, Johnny Manziel, and Justin Gilbert. Their big three of depression. For the 2014 draft duo of Justin Gilbert and Johnny Manziel, it's really hard to pick who's worse. In Justin Gilbert's case, he was selected 8th overall ahead of guys like Aaron Donald and Odell Beckham Jr., and after being drafted, he got outplayed publicly by fellow undrafted rookie cornerback Kwan Williams. So for a rookie cornerback selected that high in the draft, he only started in 2 games in his first season. And in the next year, he only started 1 game. So after the season, the Browns were on their knees begging for another team to take this man in. He went to the Steelers for a year, did nothing, and then never came back into the league again. The most memorable thing from this man was that he would miss just about every single team meeting and workout because he was, quote, a heavy sleeper. Which sounds like the most sane excuse compared to the mind-boggling narrative that was Johnny Manziel's NFL career. Look, I could easily spend like an hour talking about the crazy stories that this man was involved in, but what his career comes down to is the reality that he never had the talent to make it in the NFL. To prove it, career bad quarterback Brian Hoyer actually had the Cleveland Browns winning games with an impressive record of 7-4 through 11 weeks. But because the Browns had just selected their supposed future Hall of Fame quarterback, Johnny Manziel, the Browns organization caved into the fan pressure and put Johnny Manziel in, benching Brian Hoyer in a game against the Bills. Didn't go well. So what's the only logical decision you can make? Well, let's see some more Johnny football, baby, as 2 weeks later he took the field for a second time against the Bengals and went 10 for 18, 80 yards, and 2 picks with a final quarterback rating of an astonishingly low 27.2. But wait, there's still more misery for the Browns, as they selected Corey Coleman 15th overall in the 2016 NFL Draft. And he did nothing. He just did nothing positive for the Browns. Although he had a strong start to his 2016 season, as time went on, he logged 3 catch games for 30 yards, one after another, and near the end of the year, he found himself as the 3rd wide receiver option behind Andrew Hawkins and Terrell Pryor, a quarterback. A quarterback who decided to play wide receiver, got 1,000 yards on the season, and outplayed Corey Coleman. Then the next year, he somehow got worse and dropped the pass that would seal the fate of the 0-16 Browns. Well, that's all the players. So, who do you think is the worst NFL player of all time relative to their decade? It's a real tough question. But if you enjoyed this video, then subscribe, because I got a lot of videos on the channel just like this one. And watch this video right here on every single NFL team's worst call that went against them. It's pretty good, trust me. Anyways, until next time.